End of July 1944. The German army is on the brink of collapse, having suffered one of its biggest defeats since the war against the Soviet Union began. In barely a month since the start of Operation Bagration on June 22, the Germans have had more than 300,000 casualties and have fallen back up to 500 kilometers from their defensive positions east of Minsk. In the northern sector, Army Group North is on the verge of being encircled and isolated in present-day Estonia or Latvia. On the other hand, in the central sector, the Soviets have opened a large gap that is taking them directly to Warsaw in an unstoppable way. If they take the city, as well as the territory near it, it will be chaos for the Germans, and it will mean the total fall of the new front on the Vistula. This was without a doubt the most serious threat by far, as Warsaw had a direct road to Berlin, as well as a great railway line. Due to this was a very important place where there were facilities of all kinds, such as supply depots, numerous military hospitals or weapons factories. Thus, its loss would be a disaster for the Wehrmacht and would lead to a total logistical collapse. The German Marshal Walter Model, famous for his defensive actions and for his ability to solve situations of total collapse, was in command of the German Army Group Center, and once again he had to do his best to avoid this catastrophe. So throughout this program, we are going to see how he manages to organize a desperate counteroffensive with the depleted forces that he had, with which he was able to stop the Soviet advance against Warsaw. With that said, let's get started. On July 21, 1944, after an unstoppable advance through all of Belarus, the Soviets reached Lublin, and then launched a direct charge against Warsaw. This attack was led by the Soviet 2nd Guards Tank Army, which was integrated into the 1st Belarusian Front, under the command of General Rokossovsky. After 5 days of fighting, the Red Army broke through to the Vistula, and was located just 20 kilometers south of Warsaw. The Soviet plan was very ambitious, and consisted of attacking Warsaw from all sides with the aim of encircling it. Southwest in the first place, they would advance north along the eastern part of the Vistula River until they passed Warsaw, to later cross the river both north and south of the Polish capital, thus encircling the city. As we have said before, this action would destroy numerous German divisions in the area, and the entire German logistics system would collapse. As this Soviet advance was taking place, Walter Model was mobilizing for combat every man he could find, removing them from hospitals, offices, administrative posts, and in general, any men who were in the rear without fighting. With this action that was very typical of him, he tried to reinforce the entire front line while concentrating his panzer divisions, to launch a strong counterattack in the area. Despite having to weaken other sectors of the front, Walter Model was able to concentrate at full speed 4 panzer divisions near Warsaw, with which he was to carry out his fierce counterattack. The first was the 19th Panzer Division, which he brought up from the Białystok sector, which was northeast of Warsaw. This was joined by the 5th Panzer Division of the SS Wiking, together with the 4th Panzer Division, which also came from a sector near Białystok, after having suffered heavy losses in the fighting the previous month. And finally, Walter Model could count on the Herman Goering Division that came from Italy to reinforce the Eastern Front. In total, these 4 divisions had about 300 armored vehicles between tanks and assault guns, which had to face about 800 Soviet armored vehicles from the 2nd Guard Tank Army. Thus, while the German Marshal was sending all these units to the vicinity of Warsaw, the Soviets broke through the front on July 29 and advanced at full speed to Radzymin, which is located about 20 kilometers northeast of the Polish capital. This Soviet penetration had been carried out in a frantic way, without consolidating or protecting any flank, which generated a marked salient in the front line. Although this left the Soviet 3rd Tank Corps in an exposed situation, the General Staff of the 1st Belarusian Front did not consider that the Germans had enough forces to have to worry. In any case, this advance threatened to eventually cross the Vistula to the north of Warsaw, whereupon the Soviets could encircle the city. At the same time as this was taking place, the Poles began their uprising in Warsaw on August 1st, this also being the time when Walter Model began the first phase of his counterattack. This first action consisted of a pincer attack by the 19th Panzer Division attacking from the west flank, and the Waffen-SS Wehrmacht Division from the east flank, both heading towards Okuniu. This offensive was a complete success, and in just a few hours, the Germans managed to cut the entire line of communication of the Soviet 3rd Tank Corps, leaving it isolated from the rest of the Red Army units. Later the next day, the 4th Panzer Division joined the attack from the north, and the Herman Goering Division from the south. With this they gave even more impetus to the German attack of the previous day, and increased the pressure on the Soviet troops trapped in the Radzimin salient. This was described as a perfect maneuver by Walter Model, in which he attacked concentrically with 4 panzer divisions, completely crushing his enemy. Thus, little by little the 3rd Soviet Tank Corps was being squeezed, until it was practically annihilated. After completing this maneuver that took the Germans until August 3rd, the next day, the 4 panzer divisions began a new attack in a southeasterly direction, which finished off the rearguard units of this tank corps, which they had just destroyed. It is estimated that a total of 550 Soviet tanks were destroyed, out of the total of 800 that had started this flanking attempt on Warsaw. At the same time that this was taking place, the Soviets stopped the advance they were making on the area at a general level, and abandoned the idea of encircling Warsaw as they had planned. Similarly, they also made no attempt to open a land line of communication with Warsaw and support the Polish uprising, despite being only a few kilometers from the city. It is at this point that a great debate opens, about whether it was really this attack that really stopped the Soviet advance on Warsaw, or if it stopped because Stalin wanted to deny aid to the Poles. With this, he intended that the Germans themselves be in charge of eliminating the Poles loyal to the exiled government in London, instead of having to do it himself. In any case, it should be noted that although the Soviet advance on Warsaw stopped, the attacks continued with great intensity against East Prussia and against Army Group North, which was finally isolated in Courland 2 months later. In any case, this victory was crucial at all levels. In the first place, Walter Model was able to save the entire German line of communications and supplies, avoiding the catastrophe that losing it would have entailed. Thus, he had saved Army Group Ukraine North, which had been withdrawing from Lviv, just as he was able to save Army Group Center by allowing it to win a lull in the fighting and re-establish a new defensive line. Lastly, he was also able to maintain logistical contact with Army Group North, although later, and as we have just said, he ended up being isolated in Courland. Thus, after this loss of Soviet momentum that followed, the Germans could focus on putting down the Warsaw Uprising, which did not end until early October after leaving the entire city destroyed. Well, what we have seen is Walter Model's brilliant counteroffensive, which used the only maneuver that the Germans could do at that time. This consisted of hiring the largest number of mobile and armored forces in the sector, at the cost of weakening others, to later counterattack with the greatest force possible on the vanguard of the Soviet penetration. I sincerely hope you like this program, and if you want to see other similar counteroffensives, I leave you in the description the offensive on Bautzen or the one proposed by Guderian in Operation Solstice, back in 1945 when it was Berlin, and not Warsaw, the one that was under attack. Thank you all for being part of this community, and especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and we'll see each other here as always, next Thursday and Sunday. See you soon.